Do you think that's interesting that you say you dealt with it too late? I would say you didn't, because you're still here and you're still together with Mary.
Okay, no, that's a good, yeah, no, that is
Just in the
true.
nick of time.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very reassuring comment that you make about journalists being able to continue as journalists, even if they can no longer operate in a war zone or a hostile environment because of the impact of having done that for too long. I think the best description of trauma management I've read is one that says, or it's a description of resilience rather. If you want to be a resilient journalist and work at the peak of your performance, you must build in periods of recovery. And so even Olympic athletes who are the highest performers in their field have recovery built into their training. It's unfathomable that an Olympic athlete would perform at their best without these periods of downtime. You know, it's a wave. You can't operate at your peak without having lots of periods in the trough where you recover and rest. And I often find that that's particularly a problem for freelance journalists, but journalism in general doesn't allow for that, because the news cycle dictates, especially now with 24-hour news rolls and journalists being asked to deliver more for less with less support. The pressures are unbelievably high, and I don't think that the industry itself has caught up with what is humanly reasonable to expect. And I wonder if it's just unreasonable or unrealistic to think somebody could operate at the level you were operating at as, you know, a demonstrably very successful foreign correspondent and then bureau chief for more than 5 to 10 years. I mean, the idea that anybody could operate at that level for more than 10, 15 years seems ludicrous to me. We don't even expect footballers to operate at that level for more than 15 years. You know, it's sort of accepted in other areas that if you're going to perform at that peak, you're going to have to, you know, cut it out at some point. The other thought what you said brought to mind is that at its heart, journalism is really about storytelling. And there is a huge amount of storytelling that is necessary, and 100 different ways of using those storytelling skills that don't need to expose you to trauma.
Yes.
But you can also repurpose that exposure to trauma in a really positive way and support others, as you have decided to do. And, you know, if people look into trauma, there is also post-traumatic growth, which you touch on in your book. There's an awful, you know, it's not the end of the road, but I wonder if your emotional moment was just recognizing the part of you that died. I think there's a grief there. There's a part of, you know, you're a different person now. I don't want to like get all mystical and say, well, you were reborn into the current Dean, but there is a death, isn't there? You have to accept that part of you has gone.
Yes.
It was just a bit of grief. Yeah. I mean, I'm a peer worker at a mental health clinic, which I've just started, where I started work recently, and I love the work. It's very meaningful, but I think there was just a bit of grief for that old news agency,
your old self. So Mary, I was touched by your very vivid description there of how tough it was in your home life with your 3 little kids and your husband who needed to be in a dark room, not have any loud noises. There's a very evocative chapter title in Dean Yates's memoir called Eggshells, which is what it sounds like you were describing. Tell us a little bit more about the eggshells. Is that a telltale sign for spouses or families that their partner might be experiencing PTSD? And how do you deal with that as a loved, you know, as the loving partner of someone with PTSD who might not quite recognize what they're struggling with, who might be buried in work? I mean, the classic story I've come across is the journalists are fine when their adrenaline is pumping and they're telling the story or they're on the job. And then when they go home, that's when it all collapses.
Oh, yes. Nothing was more descriptive, really, and more fitting than talking about walking on eggshells. And I still don't really understand why that phrase, because it is so apt. why it's sort of so triggering in a
Yeah.
way. But I suppose it does just encompass everything, really. Walking on eggshells, you know, crack, crack, crack. It just says it all. I'm breaking everything, every step I take. And when I would talk to people, you know, through my job, who'd experienced trauma, they would talk about walking on eggshells. I almost thought the book should be called Walking on Eggshells. I wanted to shout that because, yeah, it just is one of those phrases that, you know, I'm walking on eggshells. I suppose I wasn't ever really expecting the reaction I got the first time I said it, but it does really encapsulate. I don't know. I'm curious for Dean to say, when I first used that phrase, I think it brought everything to a head. And I suddenly realized, whoa, I wish I could just take that back. But
yeah,
what did it mean to you to hear your partner say, we're walking on eggshells?
Yeah, I just lost it when Mary said that to me one night, because to me, and I can look back now because I've had time to think about what that word means, but it was like saying to me, and it was me basically thinking I'm no good to my family. If my family are walking on eggshells around me, then I'm no good to them. And what was really telling was in my very first group session in Ward 17, on my first admission, the word came up. And I'm sitting in a room with coppers and veterans, all men, about 10 of us, and the word came up. And everyone in that room said, yep, it's like that at home. Everyone feels like their partners are walking on eggshells. And on one hand, it was like, oh my God, these guys are just like me. Their homes are just like mine. And so that was that sort of validation that it wasn't just me. I was like them. And I realized then that this trauma thing was universal. And it gave me an understanding of just how destructive PTSD was. But I think it also helped me understand how important it was to work really hard on managing my symptoms, understanding my anger, understanding my agitation, because of the effect it had on my family. And because I think at the end of the day, that's what drives families apart. It's what breaks up the relationships, is because you become as you're impossible to live with if your family are walking on eggshells.